Okay, second help video then. So this one, I would like you to use this to help you go over your Viking rivals table. So the sort of main task you would have done today, on Monday, looking at the ways in which Athelred dealt with each individual Viking and how effective he was. And this can help us make a judgment in general as to how well we think Athelred tackled the problems he faced. So we'll get right into it. Let's start with Olaf Tryggvason. So he is the first Viking who kind of turns up properly. Obviously, we have little raids in the 980s, but it is Tryggvason in 991 at the Battle of Malden. So let's see. What does Athelred do well? Okay, well, 994. He pays him off. He baptizes him. Tryggvason says he will never again come to England in hostility, and he goes. All right, and he goes and he doesn't come back. He goes off to make himself king in Norway, and he leaves England alone. So that's pretty effective. The Viking is got rid of, hooray, well done. What is ineffective about that, though? Well, obviously, it doesn't happen immediately. We have the Battle of Malden first, and Birtnoth, this very talented ealdorman, is killed amongst a number of other nobles and soldiers, and it's obviously a big morale blow. So, whilst they do get rid of him, there's a good few years when he causes havoc first. When he leaves his men behind to be mercenaries on the Isle of Wight. They last a grand total of 3 years before they change their minds and start raiding again. So that's not a permanent solution either. And the other issue is, so a little bit like how Athelstan helping Hakon the Good to become king of Norway much earlier meant that Eric Bloodaxe therefore was on the loose. It's the same thing. Tryggvason goes off to become king of Norway. Sweyn is king of Denmark. Norway's pretty close to Denmark. Sweyn doesn't like the idea of this new powerful king that has turned up and taken over Norway. So Sweyn, potentially, that means that he therefore has to kind of, stamp his authority and show off how good he is, which potentially drives one of his invasions of England. So overall, for Olaf Tryggvason, I would give him a 6. Because to be fair, he does get rid of him, but it takes him a little while to get there to actually work out that this approach is sensible, and he loses a lot of men in the process. And as I say, there's this kind of long-term problem, which it makes Tryggvason therefore become a threat to Sweyn, which causes him to come and invade England. So yeah, so decent, but not perfect. All right, Thorkel the Tall. So he turns up a little bit later after the year 1000. So, obviously, the good thing about Thorkel is he does actually work with Athelred. So, the Archbishop gets killed by his men. Thorkel really doesn't like that. He's a Christian, he's outraged. So, he and his 40 ships come over to work for Athelred, which is great. 40 ships is a lot of ships. Talented Viking warrior coming to work for you. Sounds good to me. All right, that's a positive. Well done, Athelred. The negative side is this costs a fortune. All right, he has to be paid, Thorkel, to do this, and he has to be paid such an enormous sum, so 48k, that it requires a massive tax, a nationwide tax, to be levied across the whole of England, which obviously does not make the English particularly thrilled. So whilst we do gain a nice strong mercenary, we have to pay for it. Sweyn obviously spots what's happening in England. He sees that Thorkel has switched sides. Again, there's a good point that he kind of partly that affects his ego. So again, it drives him to come and invade later on. So Sweyn sees Thorkel, having switched sides and working with the English. So to try and put him in his place, he decides he's going to come and invade. And also, Thorkel switches sides again anyway. When it really matters, crunch time, he switches sides. When Canute invades right at the end of Athelred's reign. So it's a 5, I think, for this one, because it does help. All right, you might even argue lower, to be honest. It helps him for a bit, all right, but it's very expensive to gain that benefit, and ultimately he switches sides anyway, so it doesn't necessarily have the long-term effect you might hope for. Okay, let's go for Sweyn. Nothing. Okay, the way he deals with Sweyn is really quite not effective, shall we say. All right, not effective at all. There's really no positives that I could think of. I mean, you might be able to come up with some, but I certainly couldn't. So ways in which ineffectively, here we go. So the first time Sweyn invades is 1003. Okay, he has to leave 2 years later, not because Athelred has defeated him, but because there's a famine. So he can't feed his soldiers, so he just leaves. All right, so the first time we get rid of him is nothing to do with Athelred at all. All right, nothing to do with Athelred at all. Later, the next time he comes, 1013, what's Athelred's response to this big scary invasion? He runs away. Right, he takes his wife, he takes his kids, and he heads off to Normandy to stay with the in-laws. Okay, which is fine for him, but it means that his entire kingdom is left without a king, without leadership, which unsurprisingly means they are much more likely to capitulate, right, to give up. Because why would you try and resist if your king has run away? All right, that's why when Alfred was in Athelney, he was still raiding. He was making a point so his people knew he was still there, because he knew what a morale blow it would be to have your king leave. And that's exactly what Athelred does. So that's obviously not great. And we also know that part of the reason Sweyn came to invade in the first place, potentially, is because of how Athelred has dealt with these guys. Or at least that's played a role in it. So, yeah, pretty much a resounding 1, okay, out of 10 for Sweyn, because it's dealt with very poorly. Really, Athelred has very little to be thankful for with that one. So our final king, then Canute, our final Viking invasion, right, who comes in, he then rules England for, say, a period of about 20 years. So he does successfully conquer England. How do they deal with that? Well, Athelred comes back, okay, in 1014. So he legged it when they were being invaded by Sweyn. The nobles then invite him back when Sweyn dies, and he does come back, okay. And he brings his nice young son, Edmund Ironside, along. As you can tell from the name, he's a pretty good fighter, Edmund Ironside. He's young. Athelred's proper old at this point, so yeah, that's a good strategy. Bring back your young son to do it for you. And then Edmund is quite cunning. He makes an agreement with a guy called Uhtred in Northumbria, okay, and they work together to fight off the Vikings. So good start with Canute, but then it goes wrong. Okay, so again, we can't really give Athelred much credit for this because he is very old. Okay, and secondly, Uhtred actually does try and switch sides again. Okay, he then gets killed for it, but he does try and switch sides, so it's not a permanent, alliance there. And on that note, I mean, it becomes clear at this stage, and we'll talk about this more in another lesson, because Athelred really has problems with this. But his nobles he cannot control them. All right, they have no loyalty to him whatsoever. All right, so Eadric Striona of Mercia, he is such a bastard. I cannot even put it into words. But anyway, he defects, obviously, first of all. He defects initially to support Canute. And then he pretends to come back and help Edmund, and then switches sides mid-battle, so that again Edmund is defeated. So yeah, he cannot control his nobles. Even Uhtred, who was supposed to be allied with Edmund, he switches sides. So yeah, it's just disaster. Athelred has no respect at this point. No one is listening to him. And of course, Edmund then loses the battle anyway. Partly because Striona defected and sort of left him in a bit of in a hole, but still. Okay, so for Canute, I would say 2 out of 10, because they do attempt to deal with him. Okay, they force him out of England initially when Sweyn first dies, but when Canute comes back, it all goes wrong. All right, and obviously England is conquered and has a Viking king for the next 20 years. So for a period, as you can see, Denmark, Norway, and England are all ruled by the same person, which is Canute. So yeah, so in the end, it was for nothing. So I have to say, overall, if we look at these scores, Athelred could have been better. All right, I would have said that there's some pretty glaring problems here. But I guess how much of that is his fault and how much is just that the Vikings were very good, I don't know. So we'll talk about that on Wednesday.